Before we start, I'd just like to remind everyone there's a little QR code on the table that goes to the Ken Anderson Scholarship Fund, going to serve underprivileged and socioeconomically disadvantaged youth in Loomis. Also, if you could take the time, what my dad really loved doing when we go out to dinner when we were all little kids, he'd give us crayons and we would mindlessly doodle on the tablecloth. And then once we got a little smarter, we started doing geometric figures. Please feel free to do that. All right. With that, can I please bring up my dad's brother, Jim Anderson?
I'm Jim Anderson, like Mike said. I'm Ken's little brother. Ken was 2.5 years old when I was born. So hey, who better than me to speak about Ken's early years? We were a family of 6 growing up in the 60s. Ken, me, Chuck, my sister Sandy, Mom and Dad. Had a dog, a station wagon, and wacky friends from down the street, and you had the makings of a black and white TV sitcom. All we needed was a catchy theme song, and preferably one with some whistling. We went to church on Sundays, dressed in our miniature Mad Men sports coats, foot-long ties, cufflinks, and tie bars. And I remember racing around church in our shiny, not at all comfortable dress shoes, soaking up God's grace. Ken was an incredibly smart and creative kid. From the first day of kindergarten to college graduation, Ken made school seem so easy, ridiculously easy. I can't say that I ever saw him study or do homework, or for that matter, have straight A's in everything. Ken was absolutely the smartest person I ever knew. We grew up camping and fishing and taking long road trips in the summer. Our dad was one of 10 kids, and our mom was one of 5 kids, and we had something like 60 first cousins to visit. Give me an hour or so, and I can probably list them all. My grandparents on my mother's side had a farm in Nebraska, and we'd spend a month every year with them. Cows, pigs, chickens, horse-made Jack, tractors that always had a key in the ignition, and a whole lot of time to run amok. Throwing a BB gun or two, thank you for Rick. Hey, what could go wrong? But that's a story for later. You can't spend much time in Nebraska and not become a Cornhusker football fan. And there has never been a Cornhusker football fan more dedicated to the Huskers than Ken. Ken could recite the entire depth chart at every position on every roster association. He could list every high school player, junior college transfer, and probably elementary school potential players courted by Nebraska. And he owned more Cornhusker gear than anyone outside the Central Time Zone. Ken had Cornhusker jackets, Cornhusker jerseys, Cornhusker ties, Cornhusker jammies, and Cornhusker chonies. Over the years, Ken gave me some effortless wisdom that stays with me always. Ken was the best man at my wedding. And he had just gotten married a year or so before. So I asked him, so Ken, what is the secret to a long and successful marriage? His answer was perfect. He just shrugged his shoulders and just said, just stay in love. Absolutely genius. I always try and remember that. Ken was a great brother and a true friend. Love him, and I miss him every day. Thank you.
Next up, one of the two cronies.
Thanks, Michael. I guess I'm a table 2 crony. And table 2 kind of became something that was a thing with a bunch of us that hung out with Ken and Kim all the time. And it happened accidentally at Nikki's wedding, actually, where we were seated, all of us were seated at table 2. And so from there, it just kind of kept happening at my son's wedding, my daughter's wedding, at things we attended. We ended up at table 2, and so we self-named ourselves as table 2. It's not super exciting or anything, but that's just the way it goes. So, this is a sad day for me, but a happy day too. Ken and Kim have been close friends for many, many years. I will admit to having struggled to make this presentation. I will admit to having some cards in my hand. I was going to wing it totally, and that was the goal originally, and then what ended up happening is I over-obsessed with it, thinking about what Ken would want me to do, and then what I should say about Ken. So I wrote this lovely speech, and I read it about 10 times, and then I threw it in the garbage. And went back to having a couple of notes. And so I'm going to talk about maybe some things that Ken meant to me and what I've met over the years. First of all, one of the things about Ken is you have to understand that his world started and ended with Kim. That was everything to him, and everything else was layers built on top. He loved his kids, he loved his family, he loved his friends. Grandkids came along, and who knew how great that would be? I was impressed for many, many years on how, I mean, they aren't that old actually, but for many years that the things that he went out of his way to find for them to do, and dig in his yard, and plant things, and all of the things, and amazingly, I agree with him that Ken was a very smart man, and he made us all think, which was what part of the fun was. He developed words of the day. We traveled all over the world with him, and he would come up with a word, and then everybody would call it the word of the day, and we'd be inventing sentences that used that word. And I will be honest, sometimes we had no idea what the word meant. But it was so fun to talk about things with him. One of the things that over the years, and I've spent many days sitting in his kitchen talking about Loomis and the general community, and how much he loved the area, and how much it was important to him to support this area, and this brewery and local wineries and even local merchants, where he would go out of his way to buy from them, and he talked about all the things that happened here, and it was fun discussion. Talking with Ken was fun. Learning about what meant something to him. I know that, like, for the last 2 weeks, every day when I left my house to go to work, I've been thinking about what I was going to say here. And I know yesterday was the worst day of them all, because I drove to work and I pulled up in the parking lot, and I reached into my car to grab my coffee, and I realized I never stopped and got my coffee. I was so busy thinking about what I was going to talk about here. So then some of the things that are super important, we've already talked about Nebraska briefly, but one of the things that we've noticed is that Nebraska was super important, and it was fun to talk about all the different players and everything. But excitingly, walking into places, and he's wearing his Nebraska jacket, and the sheer number of people that come up and talk to him. And one of the best stories was we were in San Diego, sitting in a brewery, tasting beer, and this group of 20-something-old young ladies come in for their bachelorette party, and they're wearing Disney stuff and looking like they're having a fantastic time. They're on their 4th or 5th winery or brewery or whatever it was. And one of them peels off and walks over and pushes her way in between, I think it was Kim and Ken, and starts just talking to him for 30, 40 minutes about Nebraska. And at some point we realized that she was talking about the dateability of the current Nebraska quarterbacks, and whether she might have a chance to date with them. And we were spending a bunch of time discussing that with her, and it was absolutely hysterical. At some point in Ken's life, he took some cooking duties in the home. There's a couple of different stories about that. Ken's version was that he really wanted to do it. I've heard something different. But Ken really took that to heart, and he became an excellent chef. He had his start as a and everything that he would do. the summer parties were amazing because he would bring his table two cronies in to be his staff, and so he would give us jobs to do. Of course, not all of us had the equal amount of abilities. So for me, who's not a chef, I would turn down many things that he would have me want to do. So fortunately, he finally discovered that I could chop onions and not cry. So for years, every time I came to their house, Ken would have a pile of onions for me to chop. And that made him really happy because he found something for me to do. So I don't want to drown on because I know there's other people here, but I want people to understand how fun he was. When I decided to do this, I thought about what Ken would expect and the pomp and circumstance and what everything should be. But there should also be a certain amount of snarkiness because that's what it was. But the one thing that I want everybody to understand is Ken was an amazing person. I miss him every day. He made me a better person. And like I said, I miss him. Ken, I love you.
Next up, Rachel Anderson.
So, like right back here. Okay. So there once was a man from Volcano who said, keep it short, as we say so. 25 words or less is what he thought best. Correct. Widow. Okay, I'm Rachel Anderson. I'm 10 and Stan's daughter. When we first started organizing this whole thing for my dad, I knew I wanted to be part of this. I wanted to say something, but I honestly did not know what. I am very much my father's daughter. I have his stubbornness and his weird Tetris spatial awareness and his love of bad puns and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. But one thing I did not inherit was his gift for speech. Dad spoke very eloquently and concisely and off the cuff, whereas I was cursed with a gift for rambling and repetition. So while I, managed to get all of my words on a paper and figure out what I was going to say, those faults are not going to be cured anytime soon. I did want to talk about the things that my dad taught me, about how even failures are really a success. Because if nothing else, then you come out of it with a funny story about how you ruined your first batch of cinnamon rolls by putting in a cup of yeast instead of 2 teaspoons. Because the instructions said a package and you didn't know that your dad bought yeast in bulk. And he taught me that there really was no such thing as knowledge being too random. That no matter when or where, at some point in time, somebody was going to ask a question about a house wren or about the occupation of Wilbur from Mr. Ed, or how to make a giant paper cartoon character out of the copy machine. He knew that too much was always better than not enough, because he didn't love a week's worth of leftovers for every member of the family. And he knew that the less conventional, chaotic method of organization was sometimes preferable to the everything in its place style. Honestly, a lot of what my dad taught me, we talked about on our last day together. We talked about work, which was hard and repetitive and sometimes had stupid people, but you persevered and you pushed through, and in the end you really got this sense of accomplishment because you worked with people and you created something amazing. And we talked about community, how you fully committed and put yourself into things, and even if you weren't sure you were actually being useful, what you got out of that would shape who you are and change how you approach things in the future, and that would change who you were in the future. And we talked about family, how they're weird, but together we would create something special, like pancakes or step stools from study sport. And even though you don't always get their stuff and they don't always get your stuff, you always support each other because that's what you'll remember and that's what matters and that's what makes you better. And I think that's the most important thing about my dad. He was a good man. He wasn't perfect, but he was always trying to make things better. He worked hard to be patient and encouraging, and he would play devil's advocate to make you really think about what you were saying and you were supporting. And he took an active interest in what was going on around him, and he put effort into giving other people opportunities to improve. I think he'd be really proud to know that in one way or another, he really affected people's lives, and that they take something good away from knowing him. The other day I went through downtown Loomis, and as I was passing the pedestrian crosswalk, I saw stickers on the post of Cal Poly and of the University of Nebraska Cornhuskers. And honestly, I think he would have just gotten the biggest kick out of that. That the people's tribute to him was this amazing STEM school and the god-awful worst college football team possible. And he had this ride or die attitude towards. And you know, that's just for now. I mean, even writing this, I thought of so many other things that I could have said, you know? That he loved to walk to Rayleigh's for his lunchtime apples. And that, you know, he loved Hawaiian shirts. And that whenever something was loading on the computer, he would sing this weird circus song. And I think really that's kind of the legacy that he left for us, is that, you know, there'll always be one more thing that you can remember tomorrow or next week or next year. And, you know, that's my dad.
I will finish up with my speech. For you guys who were here a few months ago, I'm just recycling the same speech.
Yay!
So, obviously I'm Michael Kenneth Anderson. My dad was Ken Anderson. My dad was a very, very interesting guy. He was incredibly smart, and he was humble. He was the personification of a role I think every father should be to their kids. You always thought he knew everything, but he wasn't a know-it-all. You could always ask him any question about why things worked or how they worked, and it always seemed like he knew the answer. And even if he didn't, he would just make something up. When I was younger, we were watching college football, and the announcer said the defensive back was ubiquitous. And I didn't know what ubiquitous meant. So I asked my dad, and he said that's the high school the guy went to. So, next day, I started telling all my friends about this great defensive back who went to Ubiquitous High in Nebraska. But my dad had a really unique sense of humor. He had a really dry and sharp sense of humor that kept him on your toes. But he loved his dad jokes. He loved his corny puns. When I was in high school. When I was in high school,
I was a junior, and I was out of residence, and I was doing really well. And one of the opposing coaches came up to my dad and said, "Hey, Mikey's doing great. He's legit." And my dad said, "Yes, his mother and I are married." So I always thought that was the most clever thing he could have said. He probably patted himself on the back and said how that pun was. And after he said it, he probably said, "R." Another OD pun. But you know, my dad was a genuinely happy person. He loved his life. He loved his community. He loved his family. He loved his 3 daughters. He loved his 3 grandchildren. With me, he could probably take it or leave it. But he was incredibly supportive of everything we did. Right? Everyone mentioned he was incredibly supportive of the community. He would take time out of his weekend to go to a stinky high school gym and sit on a hard wooden bench for 12 hours to watch a wrestling match. He would drive my sisters to Turlock, Stockton, and Modesto to watch a softball tournament all day. He would go to a bingo parlor in South Sac to sell bingo cards so they could raise money for a softball tournament. And he never complained. But actually, he probably did complain a lot. He just did it anyway. But looking back, he was a brilliant engineer. He was a successful businessman, but he always helped out the community. He had no issue working a clock at a wrestling tournament. He would sell candy at the snack bar for the band. He would drop my sisters off every day before school so they could go to band practice because he was always so interested and he was always so supportive of everything we did. He was incredibly supportive of his grandchildren. He loved going to the t-ball games or soccer games. He loved building signposts, playgrounds, and allowed them to tear up his yard and dig holes. My dad loved his wife. My dad had been married in 1978 to my mother, Kim Anderson. My mother, that was his partner, his wife, the mother of his children. That was his travel buddy. They were always up for an adventure, whether it was going to fit the entire family into the Beachcomber Inn in San Luis Obispo or traveling the world with their table food. I hope my father and my mother genuinely loved each other. I hope that I can have the same kind of relationship with my wife that my father did with my mother. Except for the part where my dad would, in his head, he thought something was incredibly clever, make a smart aleck comment to my mom. She'd call him out for being a bonehead, and then he'd look at the ground, yes, dear. I'll try not to do that. My family and friends are sad because my father's no longer around, but I'm happy that we're sad. The only way we can feel this sad is if something made us feel good and happy. But I'll miss most is just calling him up to randomly ask him a question. I'll miss walking and shooting the breeze with him. I'll miss antagonizing him about the underperforming Nebraska football team, which spiked his blood pressure so many times over the year and probably led to countless bouts of high cholesterol and high blood pressure. My dad wasn't a religious man, but he had an undying loyalty to Nebraska football. So I'd like to end my eulogy with a prayer the Nebraska football players say before they go to the tunnel to play a game. I think it really sums up how he lived his life, but I'm not going to shout it again. Dear Lord, the battles we go through life, we ask for a chance that's fair, a chance to equal our stride, a chance to do or dare. If we should win, let it be by the code, faith and honor held high. If we should lose, we'll stand by the road and cheer as the winners go by. Day by day, we get better and better. The team that can't be beat won't be beat. Thank you all very much for coming out. Really appreciate it. It was great seeing all of you. So we can have another beer before they close the countdown. Thank you.